Sherry Lucas here, owner of Terrific Creations, free motion machine quilting teacher, award-winning quilter, author of Color, Thread, and Free Motion Quilting, Learn to Stitch with Reckless Abandon. You might remember I am part of the Moxie Inspiration Squad. I think that's what we're calling ourselves these days. You can search for us under the hashtag quilt with Moxie. You may remember on my Instagram, and I'll provide a link in the show notes, that I tried Moxie on camera, and oddly enough, my friend Debbie, who is a handy quilter educator, doesn't like Moxie. I do. And at some point I will get some more Moxie here in the studio. The last few weeks have been a bit challenging. Getting paperwork done, having quilt ideas take up so much room in my head, and going through this phase that we as quilters all go through, where showing our work, our quilting, are those moments that are just kind of, let's just say it's not putting our best foot, best face forward. Now, I am by nature a teacher, and if you've taken one of my classes, you know that a good part of what I do is encourage you to just keep moving forward. I want to assure you, it is not that I'm not acknowledging your struggle. I am. Right now, learning to long arm, especially on my own, in a grand sense, it's hard work, and it is reminding me, it is bringing up all those feelings of being a beginner quilter. I'm going to share something a little strange with you this afternoon, or it might feel strange. At one point, okay, so for most of my early days, I was a machine piecer and a hand quilter. And I've said this before in a whole bunch of places, including in my book, that if it wasn't hand quilted, it wasn't a quilt. Well, didn't my life just go all wonderfully wild and weird, and here I am. I teach quilting. I teach machine quilting, and I'm learning to long arm quilt. The first time I machine quilted, I kind of didn't care what it looked like. I wanted that quilt done. Period. Over. I'd had enough. So I took that. I went to my local machine quilting store. I bought a foot. They gave me some guidelines, and I went home and finished that sucker. And I will say this, I bring that with me to my beginner machine quilting classes. I want to show you essentially that I began in the same place that every other machine quilter begins, and that is a place where we feel like we're trouncing in the mud and everything looks terrible and our stitches are not consistent. It is in some ways hard to get to a point where your stuff is consistent. And I want you to be more consistent. I want you to be consistent. I really just want you to be consistent. Like, seriously. And I am re-experiencing the struggles of the early days where my stitches, even though I've got stitch regulation on here, things aren't consistent. And I know what I can do on my home sewing machine, and translating that to the long arm is a little bit different. When And here's the strange thing for me. And I'm gonna get to the quilting, I promise. Long arms right here. I'm gonna get to the quilting. It, I'm sharing this with you because there are things in quilting that we are always going to struggle with. We're going to struggle with getting our points to match. We're going to struggle with choosing the right thread. We're going to struggle with we're going to struggle with our piecing being accurate. We're going to struggle with our cutting being accurate. And when I talked to the folks at Handy Quilter, they were fabulous. I asked them a couple of questions. I asked them about a camera situation. And then I also asked them, which they gave me some great direction on, because I was planning on getting one camera and then I went completely in another direction. So I'm totally fine with that. But they reminded me that learning the long arm is part of my journey, and how that plays itself out is fine. When I was at Handy Quilter and we were doing our exercises, things were actually going pretty well. Like, I thought, I'm gonna take to this like a duck to water. Like, this is gonna be easy. Ooh, sister, pump the brakes. Like, just slow down. Because when when you've got educators right there, they are guiding you. And for me, it was more that they were there, like things were going well. And now that I'm here, there's a bit of struggle, and it's all good. You know what, it really is. In part because it is reminding me what it is to be a beginner. And it's not going to change how I teach. But what it is going to do is remind me of words and phrases to use. Like, if you had a little kid learning to walk and they fell and, kind of fell hard on their bumps, which they do, are you going to say, oh, okay, kid, you tried to walk and be done with it? Like, you failed, that sucks, give up. Or are you going to stand them up and help them, like let them hold your fingers or your hand until they're not teetering, or until they let go because they're feeling secure? I'm a beginner teacher. I want you to feel secure in your teetering. So teeter on, friends, teeter on. I'm letting you watch me teeter. And what's really kind of fun about this is I've had some, what are for me, mind-blowing epiphanies. I've always heard that the major difference between free motion or quilting on a long arm and quilting on a home sewing machine is that are you moving the pencil over the paper, or are you moving the paper underneath the pencil? And that is a primary difference between the two. The other difference, and to me, for the way I quilt, the thing that is more of primary importance is, and this is going to sound a little strange, but here it is. It's how the space is used and defined. And so instead of quilting instead of basting a quilt and just getting it, doing all the stitch in the ditch and then doing whatever I want, I no longer have to baste a quilt. I kind of do in a way where, you put kind of plumb lines in. I no longer actually have to baste a quilt. Like, that is one complete step that I don't need to do, and I have to tell you, I love it. But when I can move around a quilt in whatever way makes sense to my head at that moment, I just do what I do. And it's probably how I developed the style that I do, part of how I developed that style. The other thing that on the long arm, which is right here, I'm going to show you in just a second. The thing on the long arm, and this is wild, not only do you have whatever space between the poles that you can stitch on, you have the entire width of the quilt. So it is a differently defined kind of space. So it's depth and width rather than all over. So depth and width. But, and this was the wild part, and I am sure other long arm quilters have shared this with you before, you can roll the quilt back and forth. So you can put it on the uptake, or you can put it back on the backing pole and have everything exactly where you want it. So it's a matter of thinking differently. Now, if there's something that I excel at in terms of quilting, it's thinking differently. It's thinking differently about the things that we use every day. So, on to the machine. Okay, so I know things look a little washed out right now, and I am going to try and zoom in over on the space where I'm working. Okay, I'm going to be working right in there for a couple of minutes. I'm going to be using this ruler, and I'm going to hold this up to the camera for a second. It is the HQ line grid ruler. It in the camera is going to be a little challenging so that you can see it. Okay, it's the line grid ruler, and there are a couple of ways of using it. I'm sure there's like actually more. I could put the foot in here and work my way back and forth. And if I were doing something a little bit smaller than what I'm doing right now, I think it would be actually perfect. But for today, I'm going to use the edge of the ruler here so that I can keep my lines consistent. Now, again, I'm quilting on white, I'm quilting in purple. We'll see how everything shows up. I may want to try and zoom in a little bit harder. Okay. Now, you'll notice that I have the light off around here. I'm going to move just slightly and zoom in. Oops, that's out. There we go. I'm going to zoom in a little bit more. There we go. Now, one thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to take a couple of stitches in place. Okay. I'm going to line up. Do my best here to line up. Now, one of the things that ends up happening differently with the ruler base is you come to a point where you can't go all the way, and that's fine. So I'm going to stay lined up where I am. And this is okay because I can create a little bit of a heavier line. And I'm going to just move up a little bit closer. All right. thread broke. I'll be back in a little while. Actually, I'm gonna go ahead and post this. Hold on. Thread broke, so what I'm actually gonna do is go ahead and post this. I'm gonna get a couple of close-ups in it because I want to show you that I'm going to show you it's wildly not perfect, and I'm kind of okay with it because the more I do, the better I'll actually get at it, and that's part of the process. So hang tight.